Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. Snakes, spiders, heights, death, public speaking. What do all these things have in common? They are among the most common fears. But if you go so far as to click on the title of this episode, then chances are you're interested in learning more about public speaking. Maybe you have a message you want to share with the world, but you don't know where to start. Or maybe you're a speaker who wants to take your business to the next level. As a keynote speaker myself, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, how can I get booked as a speaker? So I decided to call on an expert, Brian Lord, president of Premier Speakers Bureau and host of the Beyond Speaker podcast. Brian is a 24-year veteran of the booking industry with more than $100 million in bookings. He's booked everyone from prime ministers to presidents to superstar athletes to Hall of Fame coaches to business leaders and CEOs. In our conversation, we cover it all: where to find clients, how to determine your speaking fee, and the 3 things every speaker needs to get booked. This is good stuff that I hope will help anyone out there listening who has a message to share. Here's my conversation with Brian Lord. All right, Brian, it is so great to have you on. You know, one of the things I get asked all the time is, I want to get speaking engagements, and what advice do you have? And you know all about this. So that's why I decided to turn to the expert, which is you. So welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, thanks, Molly. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Can you start by giving a snapshot of the speaking industry overall, what you found over the years, and just a quick snapshot of the industry itself?
Sure. I mean, well, it's always changing, but it's always kind of the same. We joke around that there's always these different new topics and everything else, but a lot of times, at least in the corporate world, it boils down to leadership and teamwork and change. And like one of the examples I give is that change became innovation, and then people are saying disruption, but really, innovation is just intentional change, and disruption is just intentional change done in such a way that annoys other people. So you got these things that are always changing, and maybe how it changes. We're not sending out VHS tapes, and we're not, having, all these VCRs in the back that are copying and dubbing. We're sending out links, but the whole idea is to get information quickly to people. So for me, I'm more of an expert, not so much on, what you say on stage. It's more how to get the dates booked, and how to present yourself to bureaus, and how to make yourself a more successful speaker from the business side. And that there's the different ways that you do that, like physically do that. You email, you have all these things ready that you can send digitally now. But really, it's building those relationships. It's having the right type of materials, and just realizing the how changes a lot, but really just keeping those relationships and keeping the client in mind and the agent in mind, and knowing who sort of all your constituencies are. That's really what helps make a successful speaker with the ever-changing but still kind of the same speaking industry.
Mm-hmm. And from a booking perspective, who are some of most of the people that you're booking keynotes for on the other side of it? So not the speaker per se, but who are you often booking these speakers with?
So for me, in sort of big scale, so I'm Fortune 500 company. So I work at a company called Premier Speakers Bureau. We have agents in several different areas, whether it's colleges or churches or, general healthcare, political groups, or all the different types of things. So mine is more the Fortune 500 type companies. But one time I remember somebody asked me this question, like, what's the title of the person on the other end? And I had contacted 47 people that day, and I had 42 different titles.
Wow. Okay.
So it is very different. So there are people that are professional event planners, and they've got those, 3 or 4 letters after their name, but the majority are people who, and this kind of goes into our philosophy of what we're looking for or what we are preparing for when we're preparing for that sort of the general thing of what we call an event planner. It's somebody who is smart. They probably went to college, but they didn't get trained on how to book speakers. And so that's kind of in a nutshell who we are trying to serve. We want to make that person look good. We want to make their life easier. And speakers that help us do that are the ones that are the most successful.
Sure. How big is the industry, Brian, like from a value perspective?
That is extremely hard to figure out. We've tried a number of times. So almost every bureau is privately owned, and every bureau is very private. So that is that. We actually had this discussion just the last few weeks now, trying to figure that out. I mean, it's millions to billions. And I know your friend, Josh Linkner too. He's tried to figure it out that if you go, okay, Vegas is having this many events this day per whatever, and then you've got Orlando and Chicago and Dallas and Orange County, California, everything else, and trying to figure out, okay, if they hired this many 5,000, this many 10, I don't know. It's a lot, but it is really hard to figure out because bureaus don't want to say anything, and there are a whole lot of speakers that get booked outside of bureaus.
Sure,
but it's not insignificant.
Got it. So let's rewind for 1 second and tell me this: how did you get into the industry?
When I was in college, I decided sort of on a whim to start like a concert production company and would bring in some artists to it. And kind of thing was I got a national artist, but you want to fill it up with local people too. So I got the guy I'm from Indiana. I went to DePaul University. And so I got the guy who was kind of like the cool guy from Indianapolis, so that hopefully people from Indianapolis would drive over to Greencastle, Indiana, and come see the show. And we got done, and it's kind of funny. He's kind of like if you mix Brad Pitt and Jesus. He's kind of this and a surfer. This guy John David Webster. And we finished
Sounds
it up
kind of fabulous.
because he's kind of like this. I know he's at the time. He's a cool guy, but he's like, hey man, will you be my agent? I'm like, sure. What is that? So I didn't know there was such a thing as like now, like I'm a speakers bureau agent. I didn't know what a talent agent was. I didn't know anything like that. And he's like, hey, will you be my agent? So I had to figure out from scratch what it is. I didn't know commissions. I didn't know any of that stuff. And so I was just trying to get him booked at churches and coffee houses. And, small stuff for like $20 or $50 or whatever. And so I kind of learned, trying to book from my dorm room. And he introduced me to this woman who's completely different. She was a gospel singer / speaker, Evelyn, and she's just, over the top. And of course, she's a gospel singer, and my last name is Lord. So she would go around and tell people, I'm represented by the Lord, so she made a big deal out of that. She was amazing and would cook for me. And that's like, I'd get paid by getting cooked for, which, if you're in college, that's a good meal. And so I booked all of my talent, or just about all of my talent, for this concert series through William Morris. And so I'd had, 3 or 4 years, since I was a teenager, booking these artists around Indiana. And but I booked all my talent from William Morris, and it just so happened that the guy who I booked all my talent from, I was getting ready to graduate, and I realized I had to get a job. So I just called around and everybody I knew who had a real job, and he's like, hey, yeah, I just turned in my notice three days ago, and I'll recommend you for the job. And he kind of shot down everybody else. His boss didn't want him to leave, and he kind of shot down everybody else. And so his boss, she hired me to be her assistant, and so I started, I left graduation, packed up my car, and drove to Nashville, and
here you are.
More. So that's kind of how I started. Yeah.
Here you are.
And then I was there for a while, and then came to here to premiere.
Got it. Absolutely. So tell me this, for someone who wants to start building their brand as a speaker, and you get this question a lot, I get this question a lot. What's the first thing you, as the expert, really tell people to do?
Well, I would say there are 3 things you need to get every time you do a speaking engagement. And this really goes whether you are great or like a great, extremely experienced speaker, but especially if you are a newbie speaker. So a lot of times if you're just starting out, now if you're a corporate executive, you kind of have to speak, and this is a little bit easier, but otherwise it's, trying to figure out, where you can speak at the local nonprofit or these local lunch series that they have. So one thing you need to get is video. So you got to have a friend that comes and videotapes you. And so, and it can be, if you want to go high, you can hire somebody to do it and get really good audio and video. You want to get video of the audience too. And the reason for getting video for the audience are two things. One, you can see how they react, because some people up on stage, they don't read the audience as well. They're still learning that. But two, for your video, people watching video are trained to react like they see people on a video reacting. There's one speaker, and she was a really talented speaker, $20,000 speaker. She had a video that came out, and she would tell a joke, and there was no audio of the audience. So I knew that, having seen her, knowing from seeing her in person. So when she tells that joke, she gets a really good laugh. But there was no audio; it was only her mic. So people watching that video, whether they think it or not, are like, "Wow, she just bombed."
Right.
So you really need to have some audience interaction. Yeah. And then the other thing too is so that you can grade it. Like, one of my favorite things, like, I've booked Peyton Manning for some events before, and he gets a video every time. And he's Peyton Manning, but he's famous as a football player for watching game tape, watching more game tape than anybody else. As a speaker, you have to watch your game tape. You have to go through and say, okay, I did this well, I didn't do this well, I need to improve here. And that will make you a much better speaker. And then having that audience reaction will get it. So one is to have that, but two is you need to create your promotional reel. You need to get video as much as you can, one, for yourself, but also two, to be able to promote yourself to other people, whether it's a bureau, whether it's to people directly. So that's step one. Make sure that you get video every time you go to an event.
Because as an agent, you're not going to book a speaker without having seen a video, correct?
No, not unless you're super famous and the client doesn't care.
Right, and they've seen you maybe on TV being interviewed at least.
Yeah. That's a kind of a different thing.
Sure.
We'll have this will happen with athletes a lot. They will have 3 or 4 minutes on ESPN. And they're like, oh, I've got all this great, or whoever it might be, Fox News or Fox Sports or whatever it might be. And they'll send it to us and say, hey, I'm great, this. And they are funny and engaging and everything else. But that's not what they are delivering at an event.
Right.
So an event planner is not looking for them to give 3 minutes on what they think the Celtics should do in the draft or through trades or something like that. They want somebody who's going to say, hey, here's this great story. Here's something I learned. I got injured. Here's how I worked my way back. And this is how you can work your way back to success.
Yeah.
Or here's how, they want those stories, and they want to see, one, your great story, but two, they want to see how it can actually relate to their audience. So sometimes you have somebody where the CEO is a super fan of your team, but that's only a really small percentage. The vast majority want somebody who can deliver to them. So
get a speaker reel, get a good one. Make sure you've got audience engagement in that. What else?
Two, I would say, and this goes again, whether it's really small, you're doing something at a coffee house or whatever. Two is get a testimonial from the event planner. So that may be the person who runs the coffee house or the person who runs a nonprofit, and go up to them. And here's the sort of the way to cheat and get that. So if you ask somebody to write a testimonial for you, they will say yes, and they will never do it. So, and it's very difficult to get one if you were just asking them to do all of it. So what I will do is, after an event, and I'll do this for speakers a lot of times, I'll say, hey, what did you think of the speaker? And they'll give you some sort of general thing. Say, what really stood out to you? So you want to get some more specifics. So usually you can't just say, what did you think? Because you need to kind of get some specifics from them. And then you'll go through and say, okay, what did your attendees say? So you're getting different bits of information from them. It's kind of asking the same question, but a few different angles. So you write all that down, and then you put it into a paragraph form that looks nice. And then you send it to them and say, hey, can I use this?
Got it.
So you're doing all the hard work for them, and they're usually more than happy to give you a reference or a referral, but they just get super busy, or they're worried they're going to say the wrong thing or whatever. So it's a lot easier for someone to say that. So a lot of people get video interviews afterwards, but they just seem, and those aren't bad to have, but getting the good written ones that you can easily send, that people can easily read, are really good. And that's kind of a sneaky way to get them, is to ask them verbally what it is, write everything down. And then if there's something else that you really want them to hit, then I will, say, hey, can you mention that how this was great for this particular audience? Mm-hmm. So maybe a speaker has only spoken to women's groups before, and then they speak to, or all their testimonials are from women's groups, but then they speak to like sort of a general audience and just say, hey, she was great. We had, guys coming in from the oil field, and we had, executives from headquarters, and we had, people from customer service, and they all loved the speaker.
Got it.
So, and you can kind of set people up for the testimonials that you want to have, and make sure it's honest. Like I never write anything that people aren't saying or without endorsement, but you can kind of guide them to get the right sort of testimony.
So if I'm listening and I want to be a speaker, I'm going to have video, I'm going to have audience engagement, I'm going to have a bio. What else should they put on their website? And specifically, Brian, what would they want in the bio? I mean, what are the kinds of things that you think help a speaker pop, if you will?
From a bio perspective, the big thing to remember is this is not a resume in paragraph form. Your bio is not a resume in paragraph form, which is what a lot of them do. They're like, hey, here's my CV. And that is not a speaker's bio. So remember, your bio as a speaker is not your bio. A bio as your speaker is the way that you describe how you can help a company or organization or whoever you're trying to reach accomplish their goals. So first thing you want to actually say is they're a speaker. And this is especially for people who are executives or Olympians or whomever it might be. They will often put these great accomplishments, which are all fine and good, but those, you want to think about it, these are only good if they help the attendees or the executives or whoever's listening get to where they need to go. So you would say, Molly Fletcher, and so you've got this amazing background and all these accomplishments, but you would want to start off with something. Molly Fletcher is a speaker and author who helps companies do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
So you wouldn't want to say Molly Fletcher started her own business at age, whatever, and did this and was the first to do this. So those things, that's what you follow up with, because then they can see, oh, okay, this person, one, is a speaker, which so many people leave out. It's kind of funny if they want to be speakers, but they never mention that they're actually speakers.
Right.
But then you say, and it helps these, because she has done this and this and this and this, she is able to help audiences do X, Y, and Z. So you want to have your bio be something that conveys, this is how my experience, these are what make me the Obi-Wan Kenobi for all.
And how I can help you, right? I mean, not less about you per se, but more about how you can help the people that you're trying to serve. So let me ask you this, Brian, how do you choose as a speaker when you're getting started your fee? And would you encourage speakers to negotiate that fee at all if and when that becomes a reality?
I think when you're first starting out, the most important thing is to speak. So you're going to have to do some free ones. You'll have to do some paid ones. So there's kind of a different level where you are. Fees also are determined by partially who you are, but also partially by the category. So I'm helping speak at this a conference for women on how to become speakers or how to build their speaking career. So there are certain categories, whether it's and this goes to anything. It's not specifically the women, but like life balance is not a category where unless you are famous otherwise, where you're going to get paid $50,000, or sort of general motivation, or being a women's speaker, or they have like employee resource groups. Those topics that those ERGs get, generally they don't pay extremely well. Mm-hmm. Safety is another one where you have the whole category is basically $5,000 to $15,000. So if you were a safety speaker, like somebody who comes out and talks about, you're talking to people who work on oil rigs, they're not going to spend $50,000 on a speaker. The higher paying, but also really competitive fields are something like innovation. Leadership kind of runs up and down. Like that could be anywhere, but innovation is generally a higher fee. You do have to work your way up to it, but there are certain categories where people speak. So if it's like one of those categories, then it kind of depends on where you are and where you fit into that. As a speaker, you would want to see who you line up with. That's one way to look. So go to speakers bureaus and figure out
who are people that sort of look like you, if you will, sound like you, have a background like you. What are their fees? Because for people that don't know this, a lot of fees are listed on bureau sites for speakers.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great bureaus out there, and we try to keep as accurate as we can. One thing I always caution people is that, and this is really funny, and it's 50% of the time it's the same speaker that they get compared to. So, and I say this, I grew up in Indiana when Lou Holtz was coaching Notre Dame, and huge fan there. But they will say, "Oh yeah, I spoke at an event," and they said, "Wow, you're as good as Lou Holtz." And of course, Lou Holtz's fee is 3 times their fee. but there's a lot more that goes, and he's a great speaker. Like, I don't know if the
Sure,
speaker is a great speaker, but for some reason it's always Lou Holtz. Oh, you're as good a speaker as Lou Holtz. Like, I don't know why that's a thing, but it is. but there's a whole lot more that goes into it. Like, you're not as famous. You haven't won a national championship. You haven't done these other things. Maybe you're not as funny. The other thing too is that having some celebrity drives a point home better. You know, like I was just talking about with the bios, you've done these things that help people will buy into something more if someone famous or whoever looks up to, if they can, you know, do all those things, actually deliver the point. But there's a reason why their fee is triple the fee of somebody else who is just as good a speaker, but isn't as famous or as accomplished or hasn't written 5 or 6 best-selling books. And so it really helps. You have to understand it's not just what you speak on stage. It's also your materials, sort of your perceived value. You know, the celebrity factor is certainly a part of it, but then also just your success and you and your demand. You know, like with you've obviously done a great job building up yours. It certainly doesn't hurt that you have a really successful podcast. You've written several books. You could probably speak on what you speak on, but your fee would probably be different if you didn't have all those other things that played into it. And that's something that you have to keep in mind when setting your fee.
In a minute, we'll get back to the show. But first, I want you to check out my new free video series, Unleash Your Potential. We love stories of people overcoming obstacles to achieve greatness. Yet too often, people think that level of success is reserved for someone else. In other words, they limit their own possibilities. I believe we were made for more. And in my free Unleash Your Potential video series, I show you how to get there in just 3 simple steps. Go to 5minutepotential.com for your free access today. That's 5-Minute Potential, the number 5, 5minutepotential.com. So this is helpful for folks that are listening on how, you know, kind of how to get started. Let's just switch gears a little bit to how then, if somebody's listening, now they've built their website up, they've got their reel, they've got some testimonials, they've been out speaking for free or getting sort of a small fee or a fee, but they're out there now and they're making a little bit of, you know, their way. How do they continue to get booked? I mean, you've worked with hundreds of clients and meeting planners. What would you say are the few things that they're really looking for when they come to you?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to make sure I don't forget to mention it too is for those 3 things, 1 is getting video, 2 is getting that testimonial, 3 is getting references. So if you want to continue to get booked and you've been building it up, so let's say that you spoke to, you know, the Boys and Girls Club of, you know, Birmingham or something like that. Say, you know, talk to that event planner there, the executive or whoever booked you and say, hey, who else do you think I could speak to? And so they'll say, oh, well, here's this person in Atlanta, or here's this person in Nashville, or this person in Charlotte. Then you take that video that you have, you take the testimony you got from that person, and you send it to those people that they referred you to. And so that's a really good way to build your network. And then, of course, when you go speak in Charlotte, who do you think I could talk to? And that's something that a lot of speakers don't do. They go to an event and say, hey, what did you think? And they don't go to that. One thing, if you are working with bureaus, you really want to be loyal to bureaus because they have a bigger footprint than, you know, just about anybody.
Right.
And so if you are working with a bureau, you still want to make sure that you loop in that bureau, you connect them to it, because you want them to remain loyal to you. And even if you aren't paying a commission for this one date, you will lose a whole lot more if you get a reputation as somebody who cuts bureaus out. Absolutely. And a lot of people do that out of innocence. Some do it intentionally, but a lot of them do it out of innocence, not knowing it, and they kind of shoot themselves in the foot because of that.
Sure. But I can say, Brian, just, you know, from me to sort of our listeners, that was in many ways my journey too, right? I mean, you know, I remember, I'll never forget, I mean, I was speaking for free at colleges around Atlanta because my first book was sort of more targeted toward young people. But then I'll never forget, I mean, I needed more speaking sort of on video. And so my husband and I went and I got a room at the Ritz-Carlton with this just ridiculously beautiful, you know, sort of wooden background. And they had set up a stage in there for me. And literally there was nobody in the room. And I changed clothes like 4 times, and my husband filmed me as if there was 500 people in the room. But I can tell that story now. But I mean, that was literally, and I had other video from other keynotes, but I can't agree with you more on your point. I mean, I think the video piece is so important. And I think if for organizations that are booking speakers, it's just such a big deal. I mean, they're putting oftentimes maybe a perfect stranger in front of their most important asset, and they need to know exactly who you are, the way in which you present yourself, the content that you provide, the way in which you're going to move that room from one place to another. So that video component to me is incredibly important. However you end up getting it, so that you can so you can demonstrate who you are and how you present yourself and your content.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I kind of explain to the speakers for the importance of it is that an event planner is less worried about getting a great speaker and more worried about getting a not bad speaker. So they are afraid, they don't want to lose their job. Like, you got to remember that some of these people, their job is based on, if you've got to have these great events, the big part, or sometimes the biggest part, is how good your speaker is. And if you get a speaker who just goes up there and bombs, or is terrible, or uses bad language, or makes off-color jokes, they are deathly afraid of that. And so you can have a speaker who's got a great resume and better than someone else, but they can see this other speaker and they can read testimonials like, oh, it was great. They used humor. It was clean, and it was, good for the whole audience, or something like that. So they'll go with the safer pick. The only time that's overridden is if, the CEO, if it's not the CEO picks the speaker, then it's off the event planner. But if the event planner's gone through and she's gone through 30 different speaker options, she's going to go with the one that's safer and still gets her job, her goals accomplished, and, keeps things, so that she has a successful event. It could maybe have been a little bit more successful with a different speaker, but this one is safer and successful.
That's interesting. So tell me this, with the people that come to you to book a speaker, what are they looking for? What do you hear to help people that are listening with the kinds of things that you're looking for when you're booking a speaker?
Well, I mean, it's all different kinds of things. And I've been amazed at the different ones, and I'll have to Google something sometimes what they're looking for. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, let me research that and get back to you. I mean, the big ones, leadership change, teamwork, motivation, and then we'll get, and I always advise speakers to speak on what you know. I'll have some speakers say, hey, I'm great on stage. I can speak on anything, which means there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's only been one time where I had a client where they really liked some speaker and they just kept asking him, hey, can you talk on this? And he would make stuff up and talk on it. But that's a really rare thing. So if you're not a speaker who's an expert on fintech or cybersecurity, don't try to become one. A lot of clients now do like speakers who actually have background. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of speakers I really like who are great at motivating people, but they haven't really done anything in 30, 40 years. They just found out, like in the 80s, that you could get by on speaking and being funny and motivating people. But they've kind of stayed the same, and they, you have to kind of create. So you have to write, even if it's blogging, you have to create content. And some people, like, there's, some speakers, like, they only do videos, they don't write, or some that they only write, they don't like to do sort of the little one-off 2 or 3 minute videos. But I think you have to keep creating, you have to keep writing, because, the thing is that you are a message bearer. If you're a speaker, you have to figure out ways to get your message out there. So if it's speaking, if it's writing, if it's doing videos, whatever it might be, you need to keep getting your message out there and keep doing it in different ways. And you have to keep refreshing. I mean, I had actually just a couple of days ago, this guy was like, yeah, the videos are old. I can't even figure out if they're serious about speaking anymore. And it was like a 2017 video. And especially the younger event planners, working with them, if something is not within a year or two, they're like, this is such an old video.
Right.
Sure. And a lot of times people will go to a conference, they'll have this great video, and it'll say, Rock the Boat 2017 or 2018 in the background. And it's a great video in front of a huge audience and everything else. And like, wow, that's an old video. For a lot of the younger event planners, and that's who a lot of them are, they are seeing things differently. And as a speaker, especially if you've been speaking for a while, you have to adapt to that. And I'm having to adapt to it as an agent. How do I help clients who never ever want to talk on the phone? Like there are a lot of event planners now who intentionally do not have voicemail set up. I just got that from a guy today. Like, hey, Yeah, I do have a voicemail. I do have a phone, but I don't use it. Can you just email me everything? I don't know how you do business that way, but that's what we're having to deal with.
Interesting.
So it is interesting that we have to, just as agents have to adapt, just like speakers have to.
Sure. What advice do you have for people that are listening to this and they say, "Gal, I want to get to know the Brian Lords of the world so that they can help get me booked for keynotes"? What advice do you have for people that want to do that? In addition to maybe what you've already shared.
Sure. So I have to be really, really intentional about that. I think in 2014 we tracked it, and I get 41 things a day, either mostly emails, but occasionally calls a day saying in some way or another, book me, or can you book me? And so that comes over to 10,000 a year, and that number definitely hasn't shrunk since 2014. So I'm getting inundated, and of course my main job is to actually help clients book speakers for events.
Right.
So one of the big things I'm doing is this. This is a way that I'm hopefully able to communicate and give those people advice, just because I want to be a nice guy and I do like helping people succeed, but I just don't have the time to do it. I'm also an advisor for a group called the Three Ring Circus Boot Camp, Speaker Boot Camp. And so once a year, they hold a number of them, but once a year I go up and I'm an advisor there. So I spend that whole weekend. I tell everybody, just ask me any question that you have to do it. So those are kind of sort of the how-to sort of ways. The other way too, like we get inundated with requests to book for speakers to book them. The number one way that I start working with new speakers is if I have clients that book them and recommend them. Mm-hmm. So if people I already work with say, "Oh, this person was great." Like I just got off the phone this morning with someone, and she was telling me how much she liked the speaker that I'd never heard of. It was a very different type of speaker who I probably never would have looked at had I gotten the email in saying, "Hey, here's my material. Check it out. Can you let me know what you think?" Mm-hmm. And these are, again, nice people, and they're just trying to do their job. But if they can say, if you get booked for an event and say, "Hey, what bureaus do you work with?" And then that client, that's the number one person I'll listen to, even above agents, even above speakers. I do get a lot of speakers saying, "Hey, can you book my buddy?" And they're all, $6,000 sales speakers from Las Vegas. And he's saying, "Hey, can you book this person?" And they are exactly like me. And it's one of those things, like I already have enough $6,000 sales speakers.
Right.
I don't need more.
Well, and for people that don't know, right? I mean, you take a fee on keynotes that are booked. So when you're booking a $6,000 speaker, you make a lot less than when you book a $40,000 speaker.
Yeah. And there are fewer, $40,000 speakers out there. So it's not so much that. Like I'm happy to help clients. Like sometimes, and I have clients that they'll have a $100,000 budget for a speaker for one event, and then they've got like a regional thing, and they'll have $7,500. So I'm happy to help clients with that. So it's not so much the money thing; it's that with us, speakers are humans, but they also, when they're speakers, they kind of fit into a category. And so we have a lot of speakers that we booked them a whole lot at one fee range. And then they moved up to another one where there were a whole lot of competitors just like them. Like, why aren't I getting booked as much? Well, it's because you're competing with this person, this person, this person, this person. And so one way as a speaker, another way I can do it is figure out where you are in a certain level. So let's say you're an innovation speaker. So I would go to people and say, "Hey, I'm a lot like this person who's at 25. I'm at 15.
Got it.
That helps give the agent saying, "Oh, okay, here's where you fit into this line." And there are a lot of speakers that fit into that. So like there's, former NBA players, and some of these guys used to do this. They say, "Okay, this guy is kind of my mentor. He's at 25. I'm at 10. So if somebody's looking for him, he's not available or they don't have the budget. Can you pitch me?" And they'll work with each other on this. And so for us, we say, okay, if somebody's got 35, I'll suggest this person. If somebody's got 20, they'll suggest this person. If somebody's got 10, I'll suggest this person. And so you kind of figure out where you are on that tree. And then the other thing you can do is figure out laterally where you are. So if there is a speaker that is a lot like you, but different in some sort of way, there's a couple of speakers I work with that do this as well. Whenever they finish an event, if it's something where the client, they know they can't go back and speak to that client because it's the same audience and it doesn't work out, they'll say, "Hey, you should book this person." And that speaker will do the same thing for his buddy. They both talk on, sort of leadership, customer service types of things. So they're different enough that somebody could have the other person, they really like them, And so you can figure out laterally, you make friends with other speakers and have them recommend you, and then you make sure to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And you usually want to leave this off too. Whenever you get done with an event, say, hey, are you doing this again? Here's a couple of people I'd really recommend, and sort of pay it forward. And then hopefully other people help pay you back.
Absolutely. That was one of the most refreshing things about this, for me, about this industry is that, in the agent business, it's just so incredibly competitive that, agents aren't necessarily handing players to other agents, right? But in the speaking business, I do that all the time, because even if you've knocked it out of the park with an audience, the next year for the same group, they probably are going to want to get somebody else just because there's a lot of incredible speakers in the world, right? So go get a new, fresh sort of perspective for the next event, potentially. And then maybe they bring you back 3 or 4 years later. But always, that's a fun thing to do, to introduce other speakers to companies or to you, et cetera.
Yeah, and you can double up on that too. So if you have somebody that you're good friends with and a bureau that booked you for this one, say, hey, you can book this person and you can get them through this particular bureau.
Lord,
and
right,
then you're sort of creating 2 allies
Absolutely.
out of it instead of just one. And part of that is a relationship. Like if you want to be doing this for a long time, you want to plant those seeds for how you can be doing it a long time. And part of that is the relationships.
Absolutely. So from a content perspective, you talked about, speak about what is authentic to you and what truly you can speak about. Don't be broad and say, I can talk about anything, be specific. What other advice would you have for people that want to speak more, that are speaking as it relates to content specifically from the stage?
Well, I would say, part of it is trying to take a different angle for it and listening to what it is and how the industry is changing, what you do within that. So, customer service became customer experience, and now it's customer success. So you want to figure out and sort of try and stay ahead of that. Like customer success is a new thing for me. It's kind of like customer experience, but routed through data analytics. So I had to find speakers on that because clients were requesting it. So I had to go to my customer service speakers or customer experience speakers and say, hey, do you talk on this? And now they're doing research to try to stay ahead of the game so that they can create this material on that's authentic material because they've got 30 years of doing actual customer experience or customer service, but running it through sort of this modernized version of it. And part of it is making sure that what you're doing stays current. So you're talking to your clients, you're talking to your attendees. When you do your pre-event call, part of it is for that event, but part of it is to help you build, okay, what do clients actually want that I can deliver? Mm-hmm. So take as much advantage as you can as your pre-event calls to learn as much as you can from your clients, from those event planners and their executives about what they want to accomplish, what problems they're having, because ultimately you're a problem solver.
Absolutely.
And you're doing that through speaking on stage, but you need to know what those problems are. And if the problems are changing, you have to figure out different ways that you can change to still solve those problems within your, kind of within your strengths.
Absolutely. And what about from I'm not a big PowerPoint fan from the stage. I use a few slides, but not many at all. And each of them have one word on them. My philosophy on PowerPoint is if it works, great. If it doesn't, I'm still totally good. What's your take on that for speakers that are listening?
It depends on who you are. So we have some speakers where it's a gigantic amount of those, and I know there's different types. There's another kind that's not it's not PowerPoint, but it's some of the other ones. But anyways, visuals, on-stage visuals. Mm-hmm. I would say if it fits in with who you are and what you're doing. So tech speakers have a tendency to do a lot more of those. Innovation speakers have a tendency to do a lot more. Story-driven, maybe not as much, unless it's, hey, here's the place where I went where I was climbing Everest.
Right.
So it really depends on who you are and what your topic is. I like it if it fits in really well. If it's just because everyone else does PowerPoint and you feel like you should do that, you don't have to. There's one speaker we work with, and he just puts a picture up and tells a story, and then he does another one, and he's actually incredible at it. Mm-hmm. But you have to make sure you're incredible at doing it, and it actually drives home the point as opposed to distracting from the point.
Right. Certainly, I've seen folks use it where it's really effective because it might be video that's demonstrating something that they experience that's really a powerful way to to your point, drive it home. So, Brian, when you think about speakers that are the best, that are better than everybody else, maybe that you see out there quite a bit, what would you say is the difference between the best speakers and everybody else?
For me, I think it's the emotion of it that
Mm,
really, really keeps it deep seated. Because the overall thing that you want to do as a speaker is change people. So I
hmm
think there are some people who are out there and they make a good living because they deliver this material that people need, and it helps them do their jobs better. But I always like ones that are able to help transform people. And I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but that is
hmm
kind of a neat
Sure.
part of this job, is that we're, these talent agents, we're kind of a conduit to help other people change through speakers
Sure.
and make their lives for the better. Like, if you're not making somebody's life better, why are you doing it?
Right.
So I think the ones that really drive that home, and I realize that, if you're a tech innovation speaker, that's maybe more difficult, or an economist. But I think really encouraging people to change for the better is really good. And so I like those speakers, and I've had at different things. I've heard sports speakers that it really connects to, or people that they've overcome some sort of tragedy.
hmm
But even ones that are on the more practical side, they can find ways to connect with people and help people change internally, even if they're talking about, microeconomics.
Right. Sure. Sure.
Those are really good.
What's the biggest mistake you see speakers make that maybe isn't that obvious?
I think, well, I guess a couple come to mind. One is, when I started out in this business, when I was at William Morris, I was an assistant, and I could not stand people who treated me differently than they did agents.
Mm,
And so I think as speakers, you have to realize that everyone that you come in contact with is important, and you are seen. Like, there are speakers I don't want to work with because they were a jerk to the AV person or to my event planner. Like, they're really nice to the executives, but they were really mean to my event planner. Or they're really nice to me, but they are rude to somebody who's handling logistics or something like that in our office. Like, that's, like, I will take them off the list. Like, I don't care how much money I'd make. I don't like you. Don't be
sure.
mean to my people.
Right.
So I think one of those things is just remembering to be a kind and gracious person, be understanding, and don't be a diva. And by the way, you and all your team are great people. So you definitely know that and show that out with what you do. I would say the other one would be is not changing and evolving. There are a lot of speakers who they had a really good video and they just kept it, but it's not a really good video anymore, or they don't update their photo. They're like, oh, I've gotten older. Well, everybody does, and event planners will.
But there's nothing
will
worse
be,
than that hot, unbelievable photo, and then they show up and they don't look anything like it, right? Like, I think that's
oh
even
yeah,
worse. Right. Yeah, I'm with you.
yeah, and that's what I get from event planners is that. So you just plan it, just budget it that you have to get, and it can be professional photos. I mean, it doesn't have to be something that your kid took of you on their iPhone, but just plan that in every 2 years or whatever. Get a new headshot that looks like you, And so, but I do get that occasionally, especially speakers' age. And it is tough. Like, I mean, I understand that now. I'm getting some wrinkles and some gray hairs and stuff like that. But you still have to get new pictures, and especially if they're promoting you. They're going to be sending your picture to their attendees, and if you go on and 400 people, they're not thinking about your message. They're thinking this person doesn't look like the photo that I've been promoted to, or doesn't look like the video. Because your overall goal again is to change hearts and minds and make people better. And if they're totally distracted by you not looking anything like the videos or pictures they've seen, that's a no-no.
Yeah. Brian, you've been so generous with your time. We've talked about how to help people get started. We've talked to, how to help somebody get booked. And we've talked a little bit about content. Is there anything else that you think would help people that are listening that we haven't talked about yet?
I think just to remember that it is difficult. Like working with athletes and that sort of thing, like this is its own thing. Like, just think about how hard you had to work to make it to the Olympics or make it to the NFL. This isn't quite that hard, but it's still something that it's a skill. It's a different thing that you have to learn. And you have to treat it, take it seriously as such. if you can't just wake up and be a speaker. You may get a few of those people who they're really big fans of where you went to college or where you played in the pros, but it is something that you have to learn how to be a good speaker, but you also have to learn the business side as well. And just appreciating that it is hard work, that it's extremely competitive, that you're going out there competing not just against people in your own category, but these event planners like, hey, we don't really know what we want for our event. We just know that it's in Orlando on October 13th. And you're competing against everybody for that. And you have to be good. You have to be responsive. You have to be respectful. And you have to put in the time to make sure that you've got the materials and the background and everything else. And just also make sure that you're a great speaker. I mean, how much time do you actually spend making your speech better? Are you going through the whole thing and are you tailoring and you doing those things? So I think just realizing that it is something unto itself. It's not something you just wake up and do.
So, Brian, we end with rapid fire. So I'm going to hit you with a bunch of questions out of, and you just fire back what comes up. You ready?
All right.
What's the last book you read?
I just read Fish in a Tree.
Fish in a Tree. All right. Is it good?
It is. I read about 5 books at a time. I'm trying to remember which one I just finished. The Story Collector is another one. So I read an odd collection of kids' books. I have kids, and I'm trying to actually write the kids' book, which is a totally different topic, and history books and business books. I read several books simultaneously. Got it. But I think that's literally the one I just finished.
What's your favorite book? What's your most favorite book you ever read?
That would be probably Lord of the Rings, which I know is a really popular book. But
isn't that like what you get made? You have to read that book like in high school. I mean, isn't that the book I did the Cliff Notes on most of that stuff.
Well, yeah. Well, the crazy thing was when I was in 2nd grade, my grandma had this idea. She wanted all of us grandkids to go to Ivy League school. So she said, hey, I'll give you $2 for every classic or Newbery Award-winning book.
Go, Grandma. That's pretty cool.
And I wanted to get an Atari, which was $50. And so I was like, okay, 25 books. At $2 each, I can do it. So I started reading all these books, like Tale of Two Cities in 2nd grade, and Lord of the Rings, and all these Newbery Award-winning books. But I kept spending the money on baseball cards and candy, so I had to keep reading more because I couldn't get to the Atari. So I ended up reading hundreds of books as a little kid, like an elementary student, and just kind of got addicted to it.
That's cool.
But Lord of the Rings always kind of stood out to me just because there's a part where. So, like, my personality type is like mastermind, field general, big picture, go out and do huge things type of personality. And there's a part where the Aragorn, who's the lead character, or one of the lead characters, who's supposed to go out and be the king and save the world and everything else, and he turns away to save 2 very insignificant people. And that just bugged me as a kid. Like, why would he do this? What he's supposed to do this, but he's turning away from the really, really big thing that makes huge difference to make it for these. And for me, that always stuck with me and has been kind of this guiding thing. That's why I think it's that's one of the reasons why it's a great book.
That's cool. Okay. What's the coolest moment? You've had some incredible moments, I know, in your career, in your professional career. What's one of the coolest moments you've had?
I would say, that is a tough one. I think about some of them I missed, like a good miss, Neil Armstrong, we just had the 50th anniversary. I booked him for an event, but unfortunately, in the big picture is not bad, but it was when my first daughter was born. And so I had to miss that.
That was a good call though, Brian.
Fan.
Good call.
So that was better for me to be there,
yes.
But that's one oh man, that would have been cool to actually go to. I don't know. That's a really tough one. I mean, there are different things, meeting fascinating people. And for me, I don't so much love, leaving voicemails and sending emails. I love learning from different people. So I guess it'd be sort of the culmination of meeting and learning from so many fascinating people who do amazing things.
Awesome. Who's a speaker you'd love to book, but you haven't yet? I'd
probably say the Heath brothers. I love their books. Chip and Dan Heath. Sure. They wrote Decisive, Made to Stick, all those other ones, and it seems like I cannot book them for the life of me.
Why is that? I've had Daniel on. He's awesome.
Yeah, I know. Why? It pains me Malcolm Gladwell would probably be the other one. Like
Okay.
I like his podcast and his book. I don't disagree. I don't agree with everything, but he's fascinating
Sure.
on his takes.
Sure. What's your favorite sort of perk of your job?
Well, it's kind of what I mentioned, doing those, being able to do that. Occasionally impressing my grandma. Like, I'm from Indiana. My grandma is a sports addict, like I call her up. She goes, "Hey, it's the Purdue game's on. I can't talk to you." So I'd met people I'd booked and met like Gorbachev and Bush and all these other people, and she didn't really care. But when I booked Peyton Manning for an event, that was huge.
She was
like,
pumped.
if you're from Indiana, Peyton Manning's like the Pope.
Did Grandma go backstage with you and get a little Peyton time?
No, she's not going to drive all the way. She's not going to drive an hour. It's kind of funny. It's like she's lived in the same log cabin on our farm for 71 years. But no, so she didn't. But she was. I'm sure she's shown the picture to every resident in our small town.
Oh, that's cool. What's your biggest pet peeve as a booking agent?
I think, man, that's tough. I think I just like being as honest and upfront with people as I can. And if I lose stuff occasionally, that's fine. But I don't like sneakiness when it comes with if somebody's going to go elsewhere to book a speaker, totally fine. Or if a speaker is going to do something else, I just don't like the sneakiness of things occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
That will get to me if somebody's not upfront with me.
Yeah, for sure. So the show's called Game Changers. One last question. What game changer inspires you and why?
I think, I've thought a lot about this one. I would say sort of a two-part one. My mom was great. When I was a little kid, my parents got divorced, and so it was kind of my mom with us 4 kids for a while, and it was really rough. But she's working midnights, 4 kids, and bills are due and everything else. But she never complained. She was somebody that just never ever gave up.
Awesome.
And that was great to me. And my dad, who kind of missed probably the most of my childhood, was not a great dad. Kind of out of that situation, but he didn't give up fully. Like, he eventually came back, admitted he wasn't great. And for me, that was impressive too, because everybody makes mistakes, but you have to be able to change, admit that. But some people just wallow in, I was a terrible person, I'm never going to try to be better. And he was somebody that, missed our childhood, but then he came back before he passed away and was great for those years after. So I think those are two that, you've kind of got life changers, game changers. I think those are two that I would say.
Oh, that's neat. Brian Lord, what a treat. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking time. You're incredibly busy, I know. Thank you. I hope this podcast and conversation helps a ton of people. So thanks so much.
Hey, well, thank you, Molly, so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, as always, for listening to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. There you can listen to previous episodes and leave us a review, which helps other people find out about the show. For more about me, visit mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be bold.